Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 15 of the Survival Project. Today's guest is Kenneth Keavey, founder of Green North Organics, a Galway-based organic veg grower that's been doing things differently for over 2 decades, not by reinventing the wheel, but by going back to how food was actually always meant to be grown. In this conversation, Kenneth shares his journey from a background in organic chemistry and biotech to building a farm and food business that's rooted in biodiversity, soil health, chemical-free growing. We talk about what modern farming has become reliant on, what that means for our health and the environment, and how simple choices like seasonal eating, reducing food waste, and even planting trees can actually create real change. This episode is supported by Salt's Healthcare, and I'm genuinely so grateful for the support and the opportunity it gives me to have conversations like this surrounding health, well-being, and living better. So, let's get into it. Kenneth, thank you so much for joining me. For anyone who doesn't know you, can you tell us how Green North Organic started and what really motivated you to start growing food differently?
Sure. Thanks, William. Thanks, Jonathan, for having us on. So I suppose we started growing food here in 2004. So we've been actually growing vegetables organically for nearly 22 years. Green Earth Organics will be officially 20 years old next year. But I think what motivated me, and my background's a bit diverse, it isn't what you'd expect from somebody who's growing organic veg. I guess running this type of a business. But for as long as I can remember, when I was a little boy, I remember before, back in the 80s in Ireland, there wasn't very much. And even before, like, it was anything recycled or anything. I remember the first bottle banks coming into Galway, and they were just outside what used to be Quinsworth there. I was trying to convince my parents to recycle bottles, and I just had something inside me since I was small about the planet and protecting the planet and biodiversity and how we needed to, do all we could. And it was just something that was in me innately, and I don't know where it came from, but it's always been there ever since I was a little lad. I remember Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth back when, way back. So it was always there. So, my background is I actually have a PhD in organic chemistry. I've worked in the pharmaceutical businesses and in biotech in the UK for many, many years. And then I guess there was an opportunity. My dad was talking about selling the family farm. This is kind of a third generation farm. So there was a kind of a decision point there, and it kind of aligned with the idea to try and do something sustainable, something good for the planet, and produce good, healthy, sustainable food. And myself and my wife moved back from the UK and started growing vegetables organically on a quarter of an acre just outside where this office is now. And it's kind of, no pun intended, but grown organically since then, basically.
Yeah, you have a very interesting background, and obviously it seems like a sole purpose when it's something you were so involved in and so interested in from such a young mind at the time. Like, so definitely it shows the passion was there early days.
It was, yeah. Well, it was, it's funny, like, because my dad was, it's different mindset back in those days in that generation. My father wanted me to have he didn't farm himself. He was disabled and he couldn't farm, but he wanted me to be very familiar with the idea of how agriculture works. So he kind of had me on working for a local farmer every summer for 5 years. I learned a lot about, and that farmer grew some vegetables, had sheep and cattle and all that sort of stuff. And at the same time wanted to make sure we got an education. So hence it's kind of weird. But, I know a little bit about chemicals and chemistry, and I suppose that drove the idea that chemicals, they have their place and science has their place in the modern world. It absolutely does. And I have a great respect for science and medicine, but I just do not believe that the indiscriminate use of chemicals in our food is a good idea. And it really isn't good for our health and for biodiversity, hence the organic food production.
And I know at the start I said that you grow food differently, and I'll do this in inverted commas, but really and truly you're going back to the original way of doing things, the way that
Absolutely.
our bodies grew with, so it definitely, the new way is the different way as opposed to the way you're doing.
It's a great point, Jonathan, because my granddad was actually head gardener in Craigcastle. So back when there was an English landowner there, and he was growing vegetables for the people, and there was a wall garden that's just around the corner. It's not an operation anymore, obviously, but he would have grown vegetables organically. Of course, there was, as I say, sometimes in some of the things I talk about, is there was no organic back then. Everything was organic. It was just the way it was. There was no need to distinguish it from our kind of conventional wisdom in how we grow vegetables or how we grow food or produce food these days. So yeah, as you say, everything was organic back then, and that was the original way.
With your education, like, I suppose Is there anything that kind of shocks you essentially when you, I suppose, began to learn about modern day farmer practices that you like were like, oh my God, I have to go a different way here?
Yeah. Well, I suppose, there's nothing like visualization to try and understand the impact. And because I guess when it comes to our food, a lot of the applications of chemicals are hidden from our view. We never see them. We never know. Like you pick up a pepper in a supermarket, it looks like a pepper. You don't know what its origin is or how it's been treated. Um, but when and I've seen and spoken to a lot of conventional producers, and you see and read a lot online, and obviously know a little bit about the chemistry side of things. But it's just even today, the amount, and it's much better today than it was, say, 20 or 30 years ago. But the amount of, I suppose, reliance on the use of chemicals to produce our food, I think that's the thing that the system is totally ingrained. That's the way our food is produced. It relies on this chemical approach, whether it's starting with glyphosate or the application of whatever type of chemical. And I guess one of the facts I often quote when people want to be shocked, and shocking gets people's attention, and sometimes you have to fight for people's attention. But there is a great example, and thankfully the EU moved to ban these particular family of pesticides, the neonicotinoids. And it's often said that 1 teaspoon of this one particular thiamethoxam would kill over 1.25 billion bees. And when you think about 1 teaspoon and that number of bees, you realize the potency of these chemicals. And as with any drug you take, you don't need to take a lot to get an effect. And if you think somebody goes out with a tractor, and that's why when I talk about visualization, if you're in a field, and I've done it and showed it in the blogs and our Instagram and stuff, when you're out with a tractor spraying seaweed on our plants and you see the spray going onto the plants, it's very easy to think, yeah. But if you imagine chemicals going onto your plants, and then you see that that's our food and that's what we're eating, and that it's just everywhere, and it's the bees are flying in through it and the flies, and it's just affecting it. So I think that's pretty shocking. It's pretty shocking to think we take a chemical that we know kills things and we apply it to food and then we eat the food. I mean, what's right with that whole picture? So I think that you get a few facts around it, then you're going, right, wow, that doesn't make any sense. And it doesn't make any sense to me.
When you put it like that, it really doesn't make any sense. If this thing is killing everything around it and yet we're ingesting it, make it make sense. Common sense will tell you, no, that's probably not a good idea.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
We know the effect that these chemicals have on the wildlife that they affect. And as you said about the bees, which is a teaspoon of that, what effect does it actually have on the soil then and kind of the biodiversity? What are the long-term effects?
So biodiversity and soil. So when we took over the farm here, the farm it wasn't in great state. It had been conventional grassland. From the perspective of the soil is a living entity. And again, when we talk about modern day conventional farming, it's very much chemistry aligned. So the key nutrients need to add, as in the nitrogen, the phosphorus, and the potassium, NPK, how much do we need, what percentage, and off you go. Soil is such a more complex ecosystem than that. And when we just apply synthetic fertilizers, it damages the soil. Heavy applications of slurry damage all the living bacteria and the fungi and the mycorrhizae that are in the soil. So to treat it just as if you can apply chemistry and everything will be good, that's a very old way of looking at things, I think. And when you see with organics and regenerative agriculture now, the idea that we have to feed the microbes no more than in our own gut to produce happy, healthy food. So from a biodiversity perspective, just what we've seen over the 20 years in terms of really lovely, healthy, crumbly soil, and the hedgerows and the aliveness and the birds and just the life that should be there, and to see that come back, I mean, that's the positive, that's the good stuff, and I think that's what's missing to a large extent when we're looking at large scale, intensive, conventional production.
In the sense that this podcast is called The Survival Project, and it seems that we are fighting for survival in every sense, between the animals around it, the food that we're eating, and to get this kind of level of insight to know what's actually going on is just key. It's just key because, as you said, like happy, healthy food equals happy, healthy gut. Like, the gut is everything that goes in is going to have an effect on our gut, and putting the best stuff in there is going to have such a much measured output on your own health. I know one thing that really blew my mind, one of your most recent newsletters, was the E904 being on I think it was on the oranges. Now, you forgive me if I'm getting the exact thing wrong, where that made them unsuitable for vegans. Like that just blew my mind reading that.
Yeah, so I think it's brilliant actually that, and I was quite encouraged to discover that for all the citrus fruits, there's a law dictating that the producers or the retailers have to show the actual chemicals that are used in the conservation of the fruits. Because if you think about it and talk about the chemical carrots and all that sort of stuff, we never know what's being sprayed on our food. But here's a really great example now of maybe one, two, or three chemical fungicides that are mixed into a wax. And in this particular case, the reason it isn't suitable for vegans is shellac, which comes from an insect. So, but to see it written on a label, that an orange is not suitable for vegans, you have to really question what we're doing with our food. It doesn't make any sense. Or the other account that's on there, please don't eat the peel, or the peel is not suitable for eating. You're buying an orange and you're told, or a lemon, and you're not, shouldn't use the lemon zest from it. What's going on there? And of course, there's arguments for that to give the other side of the argument, fungicides and the waxes. There is a contribution to the reduction in food waste because they conserve the orange for longer and they don't allow, say, green mold to grow on it. But on the other hand, if we had a more kind of integrated food system, then you wouldn't need oranges to last for, 12 months or 9 months or whatever it is, a mad one. But it's things like that, then, you just start thinking about our food and how it's produced and what goes on it. And it's facts like that I think people go, oh my God, it's crazy. How is that possible?
Completely. And I think on the plus side of everything, there is a massive share of knowledge going on. Like with the absolute explosion of social media, education is at the tip of your fingers now, and people are becoming much more aware of what goes into all different types of processes. I know there's a lot of talk about like processed foods now and things like that, which we probably didn't have the education on a couple of years ago. So it's great to be able to share these things. And I think there is, with more awareness, things will change. Like now, the fact that you're saying that they have to label what goes onto things, that has to stem from the awareness and the understanding that everyone is having. But for someone who's listening, who wants to eat cleaner, they want to support local, but maybe they're kind of feeling a little bit overwhelmed or priced out, what are the most impactful changes that I suppose they can make?
So I think, there's kind of traditional stuff that you would advise. So going with seasonal food, typically, it's going to be healthier, it's going to be fresher, and if it's fresher, it's more nutritious, and generally be cheaper. So for instance, if I give you an example, we have a lot of turnips, they're sweet on the farm, so that's a very traditional food. And actually, it was that food on the edge there during the weekend, last week. Some of the chefs are really interested in minimizing food waste now and using the whole vegetable, let's say, and producing, because you think about it, sweet, and you go, oh my God. I don't want to eat that. But there's actually so many interesting things you can do. And as you mentioned now online, you can find all sorts of interesting ways to use traditional food in a way that kind of stimulates the palate again. So eating seasonally. And I think, say, from our own perspective here, we'd have the approach that, no food is waste food. And we'd have like I think called a rescue box, which is very priced very well. And the idea there is any misshapen or vegetables that aren't quite perfect go into that, but the food is still really good for eating. So I think supermarkets have a lot to answer for in that respect in terms of such hardcore specifications that lead to all this food waste, but that's a separate discussion. So I think eating seasonally is a great way, practically supporting us, obviously, and the rescue box would be great, going to the farmer's market, getting to know people there, cooking from scratch, cooking simply. When you talk about expense, you look at some of the convenience foods and the cost of meals that are prepped for you as opposed to if you bought the raw vegetables. Eat more plants, less meat. It's cheaper and it's better for us. We all know that, you get your protein from whatever other source you want, but there are ways, and I think seasonally eating more plants, going to a farmer's market, buy a rescue box, things like that. That's all good stuff, I think, to help you. And you'll get the taste and you get the nutritional hit as well from it because it'll be fresher, better food.
Yeah, absolutely. And whereas the boxes you were talking about might not have the aesthetic, but it still has the nourishment.
Absolutely, exactly. And that's a really important one for me because supermarkets have they've developed this mindset in us that we have to expect things to be picture perfect. And of course, nature doesn't work like that. So, and the food is still, as you say, it's absolutely amazing, great food. and it still has all the nutrition in it. So it just might not look like we expect it to look.
Completely. And I know myself from getting the mushrooms, like mushrooms in the shop to me, I've been eating them all my life. I never really noticed there was any different till I started eating organic mushrooms. And the difference in taste is measurable
It really
completely.
is. It really is. That's one good example. And it's not one people would typically, go, oh, mushrooms, but they actually is such a taste difference. There really is. That's for sure.
Just for a moment, I want to take a break from the pod to speak to you about Ostique Connect from Sol's Healthcare. One of the hardest things about living with a stoma or living with IBD can be the isolation that comes with it. I know from my own experience, chronic illness can be a very lonely place. I've been very vocal about the effect it had on me in my teenage years and how my actual fear of getting a stoma and living life with a bag nearly ended up me not being here today. If I'd had a way to connect with other people who were living with IBD or they were living with a stoma, I could have learned from their lived experience. It would have eased so much the fear of what I was going through. Connecting and learning from another is exactly why I started this podcast, which is why I want to tell you about Ostique Connect by Salts. It's the first ever peer-to-peer support app for people who are managing gut health conditions. So whether you have a stoma now, maybe you'll have one in the future, or you've had one in the past, Ostique Connect has a bespoke algorithm that helps you meet people from all over the world. People who've been on a similar journey to your own. So through the app, you can make supportive connections and you can have one-to-one conversations. It also gives you the chance to join forums and connect with a larger group of people. You can ask and you can answer any questions that arise. It's a great place to provide support in a safe space. And there's also helpful blogs and there's podcast episodes too. Ostique Connect by Salts is available to download via the Apple App Store and Google Play. So if you want to check it out, click the links in the episode description or simply search Ostique Connect. Thanks for listening. Let's get back to the episode. I know you've spoken a lot recently about how marketing can kind of create this kind of false perception or a false narrative. Would you like to dive into that for a little bit for us about just what's going on in our shops?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The first thing is kind of the idea that this loss leading, selling fresh produce for less than the cost of production. Loss leading is something that obviously looks like it's in the consumer's favor, and in the short term it may well be, but in the long term it's a race to the bottom and nobody is a winner in that, And what happens if this kind of promotion basically undermines our whole food production system and we end up in a place where there simply isn't anybody left, say, in the country of Ireland to grow our food, So then you've got all these promotional tools and tactics and then essentially, destroy the very system we need to sustain our life. So that's the biggest one for me, and that's huge. I guess you have all the other ones like the Smiling Farmers and the Support of Irish, which has improved dramatically, to be fair to supermarkets, but it's only improved because it's got to a point of a crisis where there's so many farmers have left the industry. And I just talked about the vegetable growing industry now, not any other one because I don't know about that, but that they've had to start paying a little bit more, but they're still squeezed and pushed to the ends. How many of those Smiling Farmers are actually legitimately delighted to be supplying supermarkets? I think you'd find there's very, very few if you get them to come on record. And they can't, of course, because if they come on record, they're their customers, and what do you think their customers are going to do? But I know from speaking to them, they're not happy, and it might be a little bit better, but it's still not where it needs to be. And it certainly isn't where it needs to be if you want the farmer to invest in sustainable practices that's going to protect biodiversity, eliminate chemicals, all of that sort of stuff. And then there's the more kind of the really sly stuff, like which I've been talking about recently, which is the fake farm idea, creating farms that aren't real, but they're put out there with the explicit intention of putting the idea in a consumer's head that this farm exists. Vegans, farrows, all of these ones, and they're not real. And they give the supermarket and the retailer, they give them all the power in the discussion about price and produce and all of that. So there are all of these things that go on all the time. And there's more of the overt ones like the fake farms, which are really, it's not right. I mean, and yeah, there might be Irish farmers supplying into that brand, but like, what's their intention? Their intention is to mislead customers and consumers by doing that. Why else would you put a name that it brings up an Irish kind of traditional Irish family name? And supermarkets are all about getting customers in the door and the bottom line and the margin. And they're doing very, very well. I mean, they make a lot of money. So I think they've just got to really step up and try and support more, and legitimately support more Irish producers and support them properly, as in give them a fair price for their produce. And if they don't do that, there's not going to be people to continue producing the food in the country. And why would you get into it? Why would anybody get into it? If you're not even able to make a living wage, like why would you get into producing vegetables? It's not enticing, is it? You know, and why shouldn't it be? Why shouldn't it be rewarded adequately for the building blocks of our life and our biodiversity and sustainability and all the rest?
Completely. And as you said earlier, like it's the race to the bottom. It just reminds me of the analogy of the crabs in the bucket. Farming is in a crisis on both the vegetable side of things. And my father's a beef farmer. He's kind of, I suppose, thinking to himself, being like, this isn't sustainable, rising prices in absolutely every aspect. Farmers across Ireland are having their businesses and their livelihoods decimated by these problems that are rising with no fixes and no support really coming. I suppose if you had tomorrow morning the ear of, we'll say, the Minister for Agriculture, what would be the first thing you'd say?
Well, I think if we were to address kind of the biodiversity crisis, or if you look at the pollution in the rivers or whatever it is, I mean, you know, there's been this rush to intensify everything. So intensify, you know, meat production or intensify cereal production. And I remember being at a rural development meeting a long time ago, and there was a Department of Agriculture manager, and they were discussing intensification, and he stood up and he questioned, say, the demise of the mixed family farm. Well, this was an entity that worked, and why, and anyway, there was silence in the room. And, you know, with intensification, there's a real cost to that. There's a cost for the land, for the soil, from biodiversity on every aspect. So it would be counterintuitive now and counter to the kind of running kind of, I suppose, advice, but to de-stop, to bring the intensity back a little bit. And if farmers are getting paid a fairer price, then you wouldn't need to be as intensive, you know, and that's the thing, I suppose. But it's a very difficult one for any politician to tackle because it may lead to more food inflation. But that's certainly a key one for me. And then, of course, it's just clarity around chemical use. If chemical use was clarified, then I think consumers can make more informed decisions about whether they wanted to buy carrots or kale or beef or whatever that had X, Y, and Z administered to it. So I think I'd like to see that. There's a lot of, you know, we have 2 inspections a year. There was an inspector here today, actually, from IOA, and she took, again, they did it a few years back, they took a sample of our kale away. They're going to test that kale now for a whole host of chemical and pesticide residues. And we have to have those spot checks to prove that we're not using chemicals, you know, but the onus shouldn't really be on us. But anyway, so I think things like that would be where I'd like to see. And one further kind of thing, something that's actually very close to my heart, is something that's very easy and within reach of any farmer, is just to plant more trees, grow more trees. Trees are like such amazing amenity, and they're a solution to so many problems. And we can all spare a little piece of land to grow trees on, you know. So if there was a proper scheme to support that in a way that farmers were able to get on board with, maybe all boundary walls or something had to have trees planted along them, it would change our landscape. It would be a massive carbon sink. It would help with soil health. It would stop runoff. You know, so many benefits. It would just be great.
I think that's the most simple thing you can enact tomorrow morning is just helping the ecosystem by planting a tree. It's so simple, and watch it grow.
Absolutely, so simple and so cost effective. It's a cheap win. You know, it takes time, but it's still you know, we need to be planting them now.
Yeah, the best time to plant trees today. I know you've spoken on a lot of the pressures that can come with farming, and I remember from the time of the storm last time you had some damage. Like, obviously that gets quite frustrating when you're trying to build something high pressure situation, but you have built something with serious integrity. Despite all the challenges, what really keeps you motivated to keep going in this industry?
I think that, I suppose, if you're in farming, one thing for me is we have the spring, we plant out our crops and all of that, and then there's some point in July or August when it's a nice summer's evening and we get a chance to walk down the farm and you see all the crops coming on and the kales and the colours, and you see the trees and the birds, and we've only got 25 acres here, but the amount of life and the amount of food, and when the sun is shining right and everything looks just really lovely, that is a key motivator for me. And that really lifts my spirits. And, you know, you're in packing sheds and you're in offices and you're dealing with all the pros and cons and spreadsheets. That really isn't very inspiring, that stuff. But being out there, seeing that and understanding that you can grow food without chemicals, and that, sometimes you forget as well that we pull in carrots or harvesting kale or whatever, and we're putting it in a box and we're actually bringing that to somebody's house and we're putting it on their doorstep. And that came either out of one of our fields or one of, Port Fanny's fields in Ballinasloe or Joe Kelly's in Mayo or Richard Galvin's in Waterford or wherever. And we've been a whole host of similar farms that we partner with and get, and that is all good, wholesome, chemical-free food. And I guess that's something that's, okay, maybe it is working, and maybe that's something that can keep us going for another bit. But certainly you do need those days out on the farm in the sunshine every now and again, I think. We all do, really.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I would have grown up on a farm, but I would never been interested in farming. I always thought it was just way too hard work. I wanted to go playing football. I had no interest in putting the wellies on and walking down the field. As I've gotten older, it's definitely a renewed appreciation in me. Like even only recently, I stood at the top of a gate looking down the field and I just watched some rabbits. I don't know how long I was doing it for, but if you'd said that to me 10 years, I would have said that lad's lost his marbles.
Yeah, it's a wonderful thing, I think, and it's an appreciation for the beauty in nature, and it just settles the mind, and yeah, it's a good thing. Yeah, absolutely.
And just being present and enjoying the world we have around us, which has such a natural beauty to it that we get so busy in our daily lives. I suppose we lose appreciation for these things, but when you take a step
Yeah,
back,
yeah, and it's easy to do. We're like you say, we're all so busy and also caught up, and that's just the way the system is these days. Then you have to take the time.
absolutely for the mental health and the physical health.
Yeah, it is.
I suppose coming forward, what innovations or practices kind of give you hope for the future? I suppose things that could really transform how we grow food and make it truly sustainable and a bit more accessible for everyone. What do you kind of see coming down the line to make things just a little bit easier on everyone?
So I think it's tempting to say, like, AI and the modern approach to, there's lots of things with robots and weeding and stuff like that. And that's all very exciting and all the rest. For me, when I see something like, let's say we grow maybe 2 or 3 acres of green manures with mix of clovers and wildflowers, and you see, like, that's a very simple thing. And it may not be fancy or tech or whatever, but the benefits to soil health and to the food that comes after it, that really gives me a real sense that we can grow food and do it right. And when you see those kind of approaches being adopted, say, by either the dairy or beef industry in terms of using white clover to minimize fertility applications in grass swards, I mean, I think 10 years ago you would have struggled to get it over the line with many traditional farmers, and now you're seeing it more and more. I mean, that's a very simple but hugely powerful change. And I think things like that are very, very important. More than any of that, people's awareness, which you've alluded to now, and their desire to know where their food comes from and how it's produced, that is a huge driver of change. And, the fact that people can access anything now and see what's happening is very powerful. And I think things like that will hopefully support a more local, more sustainable food network and industry and, positive, proper change to happen. So that's my feeling.
Yeah, hope for the future.
I think there's a couple of things that are kind of important. One thing is like just around, I say, food waste. I mean, we've got this issue now where we're kind of facing all this climate chaos and change, and there's so much talk about what to do, and the fact of the matter is that we produce like 1/3 of the food we produce is basically wasted. And if we were to be able to, and you mentioned cost earlier as well, from the perspective of how can we get more from what we spend, and yes, over 1/3 of the food we produce is wasted. So if we could use more of the food we produce, then and we'd be getting a lot better value, and we'd also be doing a huge favor to the planet because we need a lot less land to grow the same amount of food. So there's a lot of different things like that, I think, that are quite important. And obviously, from our perspective and from a health perspective, there's just the residues of chemicals on our food, and to be kind of more aware of that. And even though, say, I guess there are limits set on what can be on our food from, there's these limits called maximum residue limits. So that limits the amount of chemical that can be on your food. Who's to say that even if a chemical's below that residue limit, whether it's still okay? These tests that they do, and many of the tests are carried out by the companies that manufacture the chemicals themselves. And plus, you might be, as with the orange, taking in 2, 3, 4, 5 different pesticides. And what impact does that have on our health? So The best thing, if you can at all, to avoid that is to choose organic, or obviously to try and grow some food yourself. And I think, Jonathan, maybe that's probably a great point to just finish on, or whatever is the idea that we can all put a seed in the ground and see it grow. And that gives us a massive, connection with the land, and a real appreciation for the food that we're eating, and the taste and flavor that can come out of that as well. So nothing better can we do for our health, I feel, than grow our own food.
Absolutely, and it all comes down to energy and intention, and like the whole world is energy. And if you're there planting a seed that's going to nourish you in the future, like it really is a beautiful circular moment. Like,
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
I've one final question for you, Kenneth, and it's a bit of a zinger that I tend to ask everyone. On a personal level, what does happiness mean to you?
I was thinking about that, and I think that peace, a bit of time to just do simple things. I think as I got 52 next year, and as I get older, like you mentioned yourself, your kind of what would give you contentment changes over the years. But I definitely find that, and that's maybe why being out on the farm is such an energizing experience, and you just feel content. I think it's a bit of a cliche, but it's also very, very true. And being out in nature, I think that's part of the reason we started the farm here as well, to be involved and immersed in nature. And that gives me a great sense of happiness, and having the time, just to not be always rushing around the place. We're all rushing around all the time, a bit more time. So yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah, it's a beautiful sentiment. I know you said peace at the very start. It was only recently I listened to a talk by a Buddhist monk, and he said, "Don't pray for happiness, pray for peace." And it's something that just kind of stuck with me. I thought, oh yeah, happiness can come and go, but peace is more of a more level achievement, isn't it?
If we can, we all in for it, I guess. Yeah, absolutely. And I think the farmers of my granddad's day, I mean, they worked hard and life was tough. I have a suspicion they were all a little bit more content, maybe, than we are today. And they weren't grasping so much for so much stuff and things like that. They didn't have very much, but, you know, um, it just was, even the farmer I worked for as a kid just seemed a little bit more, a little happier or something. I don't know. Things have changed in Ireland over the last 30 years.
Yeah, and I think maybe it's to do with the social media, or the modern societies. I often say the comparison is the thief of joy, and maybe back in the day everyone was a bit more, felt they were more level, whereas we all turn on our phones now and we see everything we don't have rather than what we do have.
Yeah, it's a good point. Absolutely. I think, I mean, and maybe that's what food is, one of the things, like we all have the ability to choose. It is within our power, like, and some things can seem well out of our reach. But with food, every single person can make a difference, and we can choose, and our choices really do impact, the impact. You can choose to go to the farmer's market. You can choose not to choose the single-use plastic. You can buy organic. It's better for you, better for the planet, and all of that sort of stuff. And we get to decide that, and we don't need to be listening to all the marketing and all the retailers pushing stuff. So I think it's a really powerful one, food. And it's one we can have nearly complete ownership of, which there isn't much left in the world that we have, but food we can.
I think having the awareness and knowing to make your own choices, and to go into the supermarket and not just mindlessly pick up what's in front of you, to kind of critically think, right, what are my choices here and what am I going to do?
Yeah.
It's definitely a good thought to have. And before I let you go, I'm just going to ask you, seasonally, what vegetables have we got coming up?
Okay, good question. Yeah, it's actually still a great time. So we've, like, just on our own farm now, we have lots of different kales. I think we've 4 or 5 different types of kale. And surprisingly, it's actually very popular. And I always say it's Irish superfood. So we're delighted about that because it grows well here. You have celeriac, which is an unusual one. Again, was with these chefs last week. And, this guy produced a celeriac. I don't know what it was. It was cooked like it was a steak, but it was absolutely gorgeous, and it's kind of maybe one that's not familiar to loads of people, but the flavor is so strong and lovely. We're just coming to the end of Irish celery season is just about to finish. The Brussels sprouts are starting, Irish Brussels sprouts. We have both our own and Beachfront Organic Farms Brussels sprouts, beautiful. And again, fresh Brussels sprouts, gorgeous, Purple sprouting broccoli, our crop is just finishing up. And parsnips are in season, carrots and swede and all of those. Broccoli's just about to finish. Irish apple season is right smack bang in the middle of it, and we get them this year. And I think they must be the best. Richard Galvin is one of the, if not one or two only Irish commercial organic apple growers in the country. And we get maybe say a pallet of apples a week from him in Waterford. And the apples at the moment, they're deep red, they're red Johnny Gold or Ulster, and they taste like old Irish apples used to taste. They're gorgeous. So seasonally, they are like they're well worth trying, you know. So there's still lots and lots leeks, of course, as well. So lots and lots of the traditional Irish veg. And there's a reason, I suppose, that they succeeded because of the climate here, you know. I mean, so we're in that time of the year now for soups and hearty food and cooking rather than the salads and all that, even though we still have organic salad and all of that. But they're kind of the key kind of seasonal produce at the moment. So yeah, it's good. It's been a good year. The best growing year since we've started. I have to say it's been a wonderful year for growing.
Brilliant news to get. Kenneth, thank you so much for giving me your time today. It's been really insightful. I really appreciate it.
And thank you, Jonathan, and good luck with the Survival Project.
That was episode 15 of the Survival Project. Massive thank you to Kenneth for coming on and sharing his knowledge. If you're listening and you want to take something really practical from today, your food choices have power. Eating seasonally, supporting local growers, reducing waste, and actually questioning what's really happening behind the labels. These are small moves that add up. And again, I want to say a massive thank you to Salt Healthcare for supporting this episode. I really appreciate them supporting what I'm actually trying to do with the Survival Project. If you enjoyed this one, please subscribe or follow, or share it with someone who cares about food, health, and sustainability, and drop a comment with your biggest takeaway from today. So, I'll see you next week for episode 16 with IBD researcher Colm Collins.